Hey everybody, good to be back again, and this particular episode is the second episode in the playlist of autism. So the autism playlist is the second one now. The reason I haven't done this is because in terms of priorities, I had to add in videos that I felt were more important, and this particular one might be timely to do it now. So I think some of you might be wondering, after the first video on autism, my discovery of autism, how I've been doing and what are some of the tools I've been using to deal with autism in everyday life. So I thought if you are interested in that, this might be timely to share it. So as I shared in that particular video, one of the key characteristics of the challenges that I face as someone with autism is that I have laser-like focus in something. So it might look like some sort of obsessive compulsive disorder, but really it's the laser-like focus of being autistic or having autistic tendencies. So for example, if you gave me a problem to solve, I'd be thinking about it. You might say, well, a lot of people do that, especially good problem solvers, and that is true. But someone with autism could be thinking about the problem at the expense of other things in life. So for example, I play the game of chess, and I might be thinking of a chess problem or a certain chess opening, and I might be playing it online, and because I have a certain difficulty of perceiving a two-dimensional board. In other words, I do much better on a three-dimensional board with pieces, which is one of the reasons I don't do well with Chinese chess, with xiangqi. And the reason I don't do well with Chinese chess is that the pieces are flat, and you need to figure out what piece it is by reading the Chinese characters. Now, although I can read the Chinese characters, that is very different from having the pieces standing up in 3 dimensions. So because I have that difficulty looking at 2-dimensional pieces online, I do very poorly. So I get frustrated, and then I will keep repeating, and I'll play more and more games. It's not even playing in tilt, because people who play in tilt are actually good players who sometimes have a losing streak. But when I play online, I simply cannot perceive the pieces the way a normal person can. So a normal person will be able to look at it as if it was, they will play no differently, sometimes even better. I have people telling me they play better online because the 2D pieces do not obstruct each other in terms of visibility. And when they see 3D pieces, sometimes the pieces obstruct the other pieces in terms of visibility, and they don't see them very clearly. For me, it's very different. 3D gives me a very different sensation, perception. So when I'm playing 2D pieces online, when I'm perceiving 2D pieces online, I actually have to constantly translate those 2D pieces into a blindfold board in my mind. So it's an imaginary board in my mind. So I'm virtually playing blindfold when I'm playing online with 2D pieces, or when I'm playing with one of those 2D chess boards like you see in airlines, when you get them from the airline, or you can even purchase them, a foldable pocket chess set. I'm virtually playing blindfold. Well, it's better than blindfold, but not very much better. So the same thing when I'm playing Chinese chess. So I get frustrated, and I keep playing on and on and on and on, and I keep losing and losing and losing because I just cannot perceive the pieces the way I normally would if they were in 3 dimensions. So that's one example. And so you get hooked on something. It's very easy to get addicted to certain games like chess, strategy games, because we have this laser-like focus. Well, I have this laser-like focus, and you just want to achieve that one thing. You say that's a positive trait, it seems. It's positive if it doesn't affect your life. Remember, I mentioned also that I had regurgitation of memories, right? So I would regurgitate memories and play them out. Some memories 30, 40 years ago, of events that happened 30, 40 years ago. So that's going to take time as well, right? If you do that and there's so many memories that you've accumulated over time, and you keep regurgitating them and playing them out, you're going to spend a lot of time apparently daydreaming when you're actually replaying those memories that you had. So that is a second problem. One that I did not mention is that I am rather extremely empathetic. In other words, I can put myself in another person's shoes. So when I meet, the majority of people that I meet are non-empathetic. Either they're non-empathetic or they're just apathetic. They just do not care, maybe, okay, about other people's feelings and what they go through. But I'm able to put myself in someone's shoes and feel how they feel about a certain circumstance. So in that sense, that's very good, but it goes to the extreme where I don't draw boundaries. So when that happens, I get taken advantage of and I get exploited, majorly exploited. So this has happened all my life. And another offshoot of that is that being a super empathetic person makes me also very sensitive. So over the years, of course, I'm about to tell you about the tricks and the tips of what I used to overcome this or to keep it under control, and how only recently I managed to have greater control over this condition. So in the past, I would get very deeply emotionally disturbed or hurt if I faced a certain normal reaction, what many people would consider normal, and even if someone said something rude or something and uncalled for, most people would just ignore them and walk away. But I wouldn't. I would be questioning myself, what did I do wrong? And I would start regurgitating every step of the way that I thought might have contributed to that reaction. So this self-reflection, I would do every night before I slept. When I went to bed, when I turned off the lights, I would think and think and think, sometimes for hours, right? What I did that might have contributed to a certain reaction from a certain person. Now, this is a major problem, or was a major problem. So I'm going to tell you two things. One is with the discovery that I was very possibly autistic or someone who experienced autism. Whenever I saw such a trait or such a characteristic of mine manifesting, if I was regurgitating, if I was overly focused on something, if I started getting sensitive about something that happened or something that someone else said, I would just tell myself, I am autistic, take it easy. And that was a very good cue, which is why I said the AQ50 results actually helped me a lot, because I suddenly realized why I was so caught up in these kinds of emotions and mental thoughts that kept me in a vicious cycle that I couldn't get out of. So I just told myself, hey, I'm autistic, take it easy. I'm autistic, take it easy. And the other trait, the fifth trait, is that people who experience autism get bullied very easily because, like I said, we don't draw boundaries. So at work, for example, we are sometimes overly helpful. We think someone is in need and we just feel the compulsion to help a certain person. Whether it is at work, colleagues or friends, we feel a compulsion to help someone, to the point that we get asked, what is your motive? Why are you helping us, right? From friends. I mentioned this in one of the videos. I think in the video on the fruit of the Holy Spirit, and election. I believe I mentioned it there. The other thing is sometimes if it's not friends, if it's colleagues, and I am with people, I've been with people who somehow, you see, from young, I've gained this idea that bullying people is bad. But unfortunately, not all people think that way. In fact, many people are just bullies looking for opportunities to bully someone else. I mean, think of it this way. If you saw someone, say on public transport, say on a train, and you know this person has a psychiatric issue, a condition, and let's say they were talking to themselves or they were asking strange questions to another passenger, if you looked at that and you started laughing, you're in essence a bully. You may not directly bully them, but you have that potential, that propensity to bully someone, because how could you ever laugh at someone with a psychiatric problem? I couldn't. I would never laugh at someone with a psychiatric problem, or someone who was so poor that they couldn't afford proper shoes or something like that. But I see people doing that all the time, right? So because of that, at the workplace, it was very easy for me to become the target of bullying, because I would be so helpful at certain times that I didn't know where to draw the line, and people thought I was stupid. I was just being stupid, and therefore easy to bully and easy to take advantage of. So the sixth characteristic I want to mention is that this is very ironical. It's very ironic because I always saw people as having an inherently good character, good nature. So I never thought, okay, why is this person doing this for me, or what are the ulterior motives? And obviously, as you can think, I set no defenses around myself, and I was taken advantage as a result of that. Many times exploited. So, in fact, I've been cheated, even financially, a number of times, and for quite a lot of money. So, I don't want to get into detail about that, but basically, the idea that people come with a blank slate, maybe I got that from my college psychology classes, but you might be wondering why a Christian would ever think that way, because we know in Christianity that we're all born with a propensity to sin, and people are evil by nature. So there is no reason to assume that people are good by nature. But this is how I felt. This is how I behaved. This is how I felt. I've always felt that people, had an inherently good nature, and that's not good. That's not a good assumption. So two things I've done. One is to tell myself, hey, I'm autistic, take it easy. And two, to remind myself, not everyone has a good nature. In fact, people are inherently bad. And we have to have the Spirit of God to change us. These are two things I've done, but the most important thing, remember I mentioned in that first video on autism, on my discovery of having autism, that I felt the presence of God. Now since then, I have felt the presence of God almost every day, though not to the same extent, right? That day was very special. I felt almost suspended, almost as if I was lying within the presence of God. Remember, I spoke to you. If you haven't viewed that first video, you might want to, if you want to know the story. And since then, I felt the similar presence of God, but not to the same intensity. Okay. So, strangely enough, ever since I felt that presence of God, things started changing in the way I behaved as well. I started having someone who was with me constantly, who was God, to guide me and coach me along. Now, initially, it was still difficult on the job. The last contract that I had, the last contract job went pretty well because for the first time, I did not assume that my colleagues were good in their nature, nor my boss, even though my boss behaved as if, he was very caring at first, but somehow this presence of God changed me and my viewpoint. So it wasn't so much an effort on myself to check myself and to say, okay, I'm autistic, right? In this particular case, my viewpoint of people actually changed. That I did not over-expect people such as my boss or my colleagues to behave in a way that was good. I did not assume that they were naturally good. So these are some of the things that I've done. So one is to cue myself that I'm autistic. Two, to try and see people in a different light. Not to assume that they are good by nature, and not to assume that they were a blank slate, but had the propensity to sin, to lie, to cheat. And then, when they actually did, I didn't feel bad at all. I kind of expected it. That was very, very good for me this time. And the third thing is, I mentioned that it was the presence of God that made all the difference. So that's part 2 of this video, which I'm going to talk about now. Because some of you might be wondering, how does one actually summon the presence of God? And my answer to you is you can't. If you can summon the presence of God, you would be God. So God is not someone you can summon. You want to know the steps. Step number 1, know God. It's in the episode, in that video of mine in the Bible collection entitled Jesus Only, or Only Jesus. View that. That's very important. Only Jesus. That's one. And then view the video, The Fruits of the Holy Spirit and Election. And you will know what are the first steps to take. But I can tell you many Christians, including myself, never experienced the presence of God until that day, that night when I was lying on my bed, which is really an exercise mat on the floor, 2 exercise mats on the floor. And that happened last year in the second part of last year. So until that fateful evening, I never experienced the presence of God even once. I had never experienced the presence of God. But since that time, it's been different. Now, how do we do that? How does one even feel the presence of God? Especially, I've told you that I felt His presence almost every day now, right? The same quality of presence, although not to the same intensity. And in retrospect, when I reflect on this, it was nothing that I did except I was in such a difficult condition. I was in such a physical condition. I was dying. And I said, into your hands I commit my spirit. I had nothing left. I gave up myself. So to me, if you want to know how to gain the presence of God, this third thing, the first is to cue myself that I'm autistic, take things easy. Number 2, look at people differently. Not that they're inherently good, but that they're inherently bad from the Christian perspective, had the propensity to sin, and not to expect them to actually do good to you. That was point number 2, but point number 3 is experience the presence of God. But how do you do that? So if there was anything I did, it was to give up myself, right? So that's the tip. Give up yourself entirely. So I can't remember who I was telling this to recently, but until one reaches rock bottom in life, you will never experience the presence of God. Now that doesn't mean that you've got to be utterly sick or you've got to be utterly in poverty to be rock bottom, because there are people who are very sick or in utter poverty who don't hit rock bottom because they haven't given up themselves. They're still fighting. And you say, isn't that good to be determined to fight, to make a comeback? Yes, it is very good, but when you still have the will to fight, and that could be a God-given will, but if you have that will and determination to fight, it is also almost impossible to experience the presence of God. And I don't know the true reason. God only knows. Only God knows. But I strongly suspect it is because, as Jesus said, happy are the meek in spirit. Why? Why are people who are meek in spirit, poor in spirit, happy? Why are they blessed? Why are they blessed? Because I strongly suspect that's when we do not allow, or there is nothing in our life that will hinder God from becoming the center of our life or to manifest His presence to us. Now you might be saying, God can manifest His presence at any time He wants because He's omnipotent, and that is absolutely true. In fact, that was my assumption for many years of my life. Why didn't God manifest His presence to me? He could if He wanted to. He just didn't want to. And then when I reached rock bottom, at least physically, and then I said, I'm dying, Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. That's when His presence manifested in my life, in the room where I was. So, if there was one thing that I did, that was it, giving up on myself. The moment I gave up on life, on myself, and the hope of being able to stay alive because I was coughing so badly and so over such a long period of time, and I was so fatigued, I virtually gave up. I thought I was going to die possibly. And that's when God manifested His presence in my life. So if that is the third tip, then let it be. So if you hit rock bottom, not necessarily financially, not necessarily in health, but in spirit. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. With that, my friends, stay blessed, and we'll see each other again soon.